You took your first breath in Italy, inside a mansion guarded by more than one bodyguard on watch. Your father was a mafia boss, and you were his heir. Being the head of the mafia meant standing at the very top of the criminal world. Power, money, and anything you wanted were right at your fingertips. Of course, you still had a long way to go before taking the seat. But even babies in the mafia had plenty of problems. You had to worry about rival gangs, or even your own family, betraying you. So the faster you grew up, the better. You were constantly under threat of kidnapping or even assassination. Yes, even though you were just a sweet little baby, people were trying to kill you. Anyone who had issues with your father might try to kidnap you, or people he'd crossed could use you for revenge. So you spent your childhood always watching your back. Knowing that someone could try to kill you or your family at any moment was far from a pleasant childhood. And seeing your father kill people every day only made it more terrifying. While most children played with toys, you watched your father kill at least 5 people a week. And in the mafia, the one thing you absolutely couldn't do was tell anyone what you saw. Otherwise, you'd become one of the men your father dealt with. You survived several kidnapping attempts and a few situations where men had to be taken out, and somehow you made it safely to age 7. During that time, you gained a younger brother. Maybe he could be a rival someday, but you were the older one. That meant the seat belonged to you. Even though the family business was waiting, you still needed education. Of course, you went to school with bodyguards. While you were in class, they guarded the school entrances and exits. Your father even had the backgrounds of all the teachers checked, just to make sure no rival gang member posing as a teacher would slip in and give you your final lesson. If something at school made him uneasy, a phone call and a bit of bribery fixed it. Depending on the size of the favor, the payment might be a car or even a house. Because your father had money, a lot of money. The mafia earned money through drug and alcohol smuggling, production and distribution, loan sharking with extremely high interest, and gambling. When people couldn't repay their debts, the mafia handled it in their own way, and it wasn't pleasant. They ran sports betting operations, underground casinos, and illegal lotteries. They'd pay coaches, athletes, or referees huge sums to make sure the team they backed would win. But probably the most horrifying source of income was human trafficking. Women, children, the elderly, everyone was treated like cash. People were often kidnapped from abroad for their organs or for twisted desires. The money they made was illegal anyway, so there were no taxes or deductions. It went straight into their pockets. During your school years, you learned early how to watch your back. You witnessed many murders, but you couldn't tell anyone. You didn't really have friends either. Other kids were warned by their parents and were too scared to even talk to you. Still, compared to other mafia children, you were somewhat lucky. Many mafia kids weren't even allowed to attend school. They grew up isolated until adolescence, receiving an antisocial kind of education. By the time you reached that age, you quit formal schooling and started learning your father's business. You collected money, carried messages, and handled small errands. It wasn't very action-packed yet, but at least you weren't killing anyone. Mafia members valued omerta, the code of silence, and loyalty to the family above everything else. You were taught clearly, never speak to the police or outsiders. The family's honor came first. Once you proved your loyalty by completing tasks successfully, it was time to learn how to use weapons. You might need to handle dirtier jobs at any moment. The mafia commonly used pistols, revolvers, rifles, machine guns, and explosives. They were famous for planting bombs in cars. The victim would get in, turn the key, and there was no escape. But the most iconic weapon was the Tommy gun. It was practically the symbol of the mafia. Whether it was one enemy or 10 didn't matter. Charging in with a Tommy gun usually meant you survived. Switchblades and bulletproof cars were also common because it felt like the entire city wanted you dead. Even going 2 blocks meant taking a car. Walking was often suicide. With this routine, you reached your 20s. There wasn't a fixed age to become the boss. Some took over in their 20s, some in their 30s, some in their 40s. if they lived that long. Now it was time to sharpen your weapons training and fully take over your father's dirty work. You started construction projects and used the concrete foundations as mass graves. You opened multiple laundromats and made millions without washing a single shirt. Yes, laundering money was that easy. Everything ran on cash, so it couldn't be traced. By the time you were 22, you'd expanded the operations enough that your father handed you the seat. He told your brother to back you up, just as you had backed him. But being the boss made life even harder. The police, rival gangs, and even members of your own family wanted you dead. You had to move around constantly with bodyguards. The police were always on your tail.
Protecting the throne became a full-time job.
You managed to get through a few years without major problems, but things only got harder with age. In your 30s, you were expected to marry and have children so the Mafia could continue after you. But bringing a woman into your life meant giving your enemies another hostage and another person to protect. So you avoided marriage. Yes, you had huge wealth, but legal trouble, political shifts, or police raids could destroy everything. Most Mafia bosses either spent long years in prison or were killed in assassinations. Money couldn't fix everything. At 35, you bribed some police officers to ignore drug shipments. But one officer refused to take your dirty money. That wasn't an answer you could accept. You ordered your men to execute him. The men you sent were caught by the police. You knew they wouldn't talk, because talking meant death anyway, but the possibility that they might was enough to keep you uneasy. You'd made it to 35 alive. You had enormous wealth and endless connections, yet you still had to live in the shadows. Even starting a family felt risky. This wasn't a job you could simply resign from, so you aimed higher. You decided to expand globally and move into America. You wanted to take your Mafia career to the top with a casino in Las Vegas. That wasn't too difficult. Las Vegas had practically been built on Mafia investments. With a few phone calls and a large sum of money, you became a casino owner. Now you were making even more money legally. Your latest moves shook the underworld. Suddenly, you were surrounded by more friends than enemies. You'd never had this much influence and never this much money. You handed the Mafia seat to your brother and decided it was finally time to marry and start a family. You held a quiet wedding because police loved infiltrating Mafia weddings. They were basically giant underworld networking events. By your 3rd year of marriage, you had added hotels to your casinos. They brought in even more money than drugs or weapons ever had. Meanwhile, your brother kept running the dirty work behind the scenes. Your fortune kept multiplying.
At 40, your wife gave birth to a daughter.
Determined not to give her the childhood you had, you bought an island and withdrew from society for a while. You lived like a ghost. After 7 years, you returned to the city. Your brother had expanded the empire even further. By then, you weren't as publicly known anymore, and that made life easier. You sent your daughter to school, then to university, then watched her get married. Eventually, you became a grandfather. You spent time with your grandchild, and looking back, you had accumulated countless memories. Contrary to what people say, money did bring a lot of happiness, as long as it was safe. After a few peaceful years watching your grandchild grow up, you passed 70 and finally took your last breath of natural causes.